Well, welcome back. This is question number 2 of the Summa Theologia. Hopefully you already watched the first one, which was on sacred doctrine, the nature and extent of sacred doctrine, and it all builds. That's the thing. The cool thing about the Summa Theologia is that it all kind of progresses really interestingly. So don't jump into question number 2 unless you've seen and already seen the video on question number 1, right? So in question number 1, Thomas establishes that there is sacred doctrine in addition to philosophy or the science of philosophy, because our end is supernatural and we are being guided to an end that is beyond what we can, through the light of our human reason, come to know on our own. And so therefore God, through Holy Mother Church, has to reveal things to us that help guide us to that supernatural end, which we will accept through faith and also through reason as well. So question number 2 begins a new treatise. Okay, you had the treatise on sacred doctrine. Now this is the treatise on the one God, and you can see that it's going to be 26 articles. 25 articles will be the treatise on the one God. Okay, and this is where we're going to get into the attributes of God, the Holy Trinity, and these kind of things. Really an interesting part of the Summa. But it all starts with, does God exist in the first place, right? There's only 3 articles in this question, so this is going to be a pretty brief video. And it's fundamental, because if he can't prove that God exists, then again, really the rest of it really matters in the first place. And also, I just want to mention something that I don't think I mentioned in the first video, is that this video series is called The Gist, because a gist is just that. It's the gist of what Thomas is teaching. I'm clearly not getting deep into any of this. I want you just to be able to know the questions that Thomas asks in these the articles and the questions, and kind of where he's going with the overall theme of the Summa, right? So the first of the 3 articles says whether the existence of God is self-evident. Now, self-evident means a priori knowledge, which means before experience. What can we know before we experience something? Like first principles, Thomas would argue, things that are known in and of themselves, and you don't have to experience something. Some philosophers would say basic, math, 2 + 2, you would know. You don't have to experience it, although we are taught it, but it's a principle that you might know before you experience anything. Okay, so that's just an example of it. Thomas comes down saying that God's existence is not a priori. It's not self-evident. Interestingly, in this article, he refutes Anselm's ontological argument. Okay, if you're not familiar with that, basically Anselm says that God is defined as that which nothing greater can be imagined, right? That's the definition of God, that which nothing greater can be imagined, right? It's a concept in our mind. And then Anselm said, well, but if the reality of something is greater than the concept, and so if the concept is that which nothing greater can be imagined, well, then the reality of it would have to be greater, and therefore the reality of the concept is real, because it's greater, right? It's like you would probably rather have a real ice cream cone than just one in your mind, right? But Thomas doesn't think that that's a very feasible argument, so he denies the ontological argument of Anselm, and he also says that God's existence is not self-evident. So if it's not self-evident, what is it? Well, it's demonstrated. And if you know Scripture, Romans 1:20 says, the invisible attributes of God are known by those things which he has made. Okay, the created world proves the existence of God. That's what he's getting at here. And then Paul in Romans 1:20 says, therefore they have no excuse. He's talking about the heathens. The heathens that don't believe in God, they have no excuse, because the evidence of God is everywhere we look, right? And he makes a distinction here between a priori and a posteriori. And as I mentioned a moment ago, a priori means before experience. So, and a priori in this sense would be when you know the cause, and therefore you can assume the effects. Okay, the sun's going to rise tomorrow, therefore that's the cause. Therefore, the effects it's going to get light and it's going to get warm. That's an a priori argument. Okay. A posteriori means that when you see something like this picture here and all these pins of a bowling alley flying all over the place, you can assume, and the ball there, you can assume somebody threw that ball down. Okay, there was a human, most likely, that somebody did that, right? Or if you see a burned building, you can assume that there was a fire. If you see paw prints in the snow, you can assume there's an animal, right? So that's Thomas's basic argument here, is that we look around, we see the effects of God, and therefore we assume a cause. Now it's going to be interesting because the last of the empiricist, real famous triad of empiricist philosophers, David Hume, would deny all causality. Okay, why? Because we don't sense causes. We can sense one thing and then another thing, and it seems like there's a cause and effect relationship, but he says that's subjective and that's not intrinsic in what happened. And so anyways, that's kind of an interesting thing with David Hume and his philosophy. All right, so Article 3 is whether God exists. Okay, so this is the most famous article in the entire Summa. Interestingly, it's Part 1, Question 2, Article 3, 1, 2, 3. And so, does God exist? This is where we get the famous 5 proofs for the existence of God. It's something that you probably want to go and read and study and memorize, at least memorize what they are. Okay, so the unmoved mover, the uncaused cause, God as necessary versus just being possible. He's a necessary being. Everything else is just possible. Degrees of perfection would be the 4th one. And then the 5th one, my personal favorite, is governance of the world. Sometimes people call it intelligent design. That has to do with teleology, God directing all things to their final end, which we see in nature. We see birds flying south and birds building nests and ants building mounds, and they all seem to be doing things for a proper end, and so that seems to indicate that there's some designer behind it all, and that's the 5th one. Okay, I said I wasn't going to explain them, but the 5th one's my favorite, so I explained it. All right, well, that is going to do it for this second question of the Summa. I hope you enjoyed this. There will be more to come. In fact, the plan is to do all 621 questions of the Summa, so stay tuned. More to come very soon. God bless you. Thanks for watching.